Thank you for watching my video, and please feel free to like, subscribe and comment. In 1461, the Wars of the Roses was coming to a critical juncture. The Yorkists had lost their figurehead, Richard, Duke of York, at the Battle of Wakefield in late December of 1460, but the Lancastrian monarchy had advanced Henry VI on the throne. England needed strong kingship, but Henry was unable to provide this. English politics had been divided since the loss of the 100 Years' War in 1453. The Lancastrians, led by Henry's queen Margaret of Anjou, were determined to fight tooth and nail to cling on to power that they scarcely deserved. The Civil War was now into its 6th year, and had largely been a stalemate, with the Yorkists shading the fighting that had taken place so far. However, in the form of the late Duke of York's son, Edward, Earl of March, they had a natural-born leader of men, and by the end of his career, Edward's track record in battle would be exemplary. Under Edward's command, the Yorkists would make a decisive and bloody breakthrough at Towton in March of 1461. And this is the story of that bloody day in English history. After the death of his father, Edward had taken up the Yorkist mantle, and at the Battle of Mortimer's Cross, Edward had his first success, where he was victorious against a Lancastrian army. But a fortnight later, fortunes continued to swing, as Edward's ally, the Earl of Warwick, was defeated at the Second Battle of St Albans in Hertfordshire. That battle was most significant as Queen Margaret regained custody of her childlike husband, Henry VI, who had been prisoner to Margaret's deadly enemy, Warwick. Poor Henry was nothing more than a pawn in an increasingly vicious chess game. It's hard not to feel sorry for this inept but harmless man. In the aftermath of that setback at St Albans, Warwick met up with Edward, and the two rode for London, where they expected to find the king and the royal family. However, Henry had been taken north by Margaret, and now Edward firmly set his sights on the crown, as it appeared to him that the royal couple were absconding from their royal duties. The citizens of London appeared to be of the same mind as Edward, and they declared him king. However, Edward still needed a decisive victory against Margaret and Henry's army, and on the 29th of March they finally met at Towton in North Yorkshire. The battle was vicious in the extreme, and demonstrated all the divisions that had crept into English politics since the loss of France in 1453. A description of the battle goes that son fought against father, brother against brother, and so on. In short, families were being torn apart, and it was a tragic situation that would have a tragic loss of life. The conditions on that day were unforgiving, with snow and wind blowing in the soldiers' faces, but all the same the fighting was ferocious, and both sides sustained heavy losses. But towards the end of the battle, it was the Lancastrian army who started to fall apart, as their ranks broke up and they fled the battlefield. The triumphant Yorkist army were not in a forgiving mood, and pursued the deserters as far as York, where Henry and Margaret awaited for news of the outcome of the battle. When it became clear to them of the disaster that had befallen their army, the royal couple, along with a number of their most powerful supporters, fled north for Scotland. England had a new king. The Earl of March was now Edward IV. In the centuries since the Battle of Towton, mass graves and skeletons have been discovered in and around the site of the battlefield. What has been learned is that boys as young as 16 fought and died that day. This is not unheard of in medieval history. For a famous example, Edward the Black Prince was 16 when he fought at Crécy in 1346, but it does not take away from the tragedy of that day. Giving exact death tolls for the battle is hard, as the chroniclers of the time are given to massively exaggerating numbers. However, it is safe to say that the deaths were in substantial numbers, and Towton is certainly the bloodiest battle to ever be fought on English soil. Modern historians are prone to blaming Henry VI solely for this destructive civil war, but he was a gentle, kindly man. If more people at the time had been perhaps a little bit more like him and less self-serving, then perhaps the Wars of the Roses could have either been avoided or perhaps less harmful for the country. England may also have thought, with Henry's deposition, that they had a king now in Edward IV who'd bring an end to all of their decades-long troubles. Edward, after all, was tall, strong, handsome, young, and vigorous, everything you'd want in a medieval king. He had also proved that he was a natural leader. But as time would tell, Edward was not infallible, and he was not the answer to all of the general population's prayers. The Lancastrians were not done yet.